Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Tuesday edition of Point of View, and we certainly have a lot that we will cover over the next couple of hours. First of all, we're going to be talking in just a minute about the subject of leadership. I think you're going to find that very helpful. Then later this hour, we'll get to a couple of the articles we've posted, one by Victor Davis Hanson, another one by Newt Gingrich, but we'll also kind of give you a preview of what we'll be talking about tomorrow when we'll have a more in-depth look at what is happening in China, the testing of this hypersonic nuclear-capable missile and what that might mean, and of course, looking at China as in terms of the effect that is having on Christians there, and of course upcoming Olympics that'll be taking place. There are lots of things that we'll certainly be talking about this hour. And then next hour we'll have in studio with us Dr. Kathy Koch. She is the author of quite a number of books, including 8 Great Smarts, and you will certainly appreciate that if you have children or grandchildren. But we wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about this new book, Lead Like It Matters to God, Values-Driven Leadership in a Success-Driven World. It is published by our good friends at InterVarsity Press. It is written by Richard Stearns, who is the president emeritus of World Vision. We've had him on the program in the past as we've talked about some of his books, like The Hole in Our Gospel, which, by the way, was the 2010 Christian Book of the Year. He's also written Unfinished, an individual that in the past also had served, and it shows up in this book, both as CEO at Parker Brothers and Lennox, but is probably best known for his 20 years there at World Vision, received 5 honorary doctoral degrees for his humanitarian service, a graduate of Cornell University with an MBA from the Wharton School of Business there at the University of Pennsylvania. Richard, welcome back to Point of View.
Hey, thanks, Kerby. Great to be on the program.
I thought while we're talking about your credentials, I smiled and really enjoyed the conversation of how you ended up in the Wharton School of Business, because I think it illustrates a great principle about perseverance and a number of other things that certainly relate to this idea of leadership, don't they?
Well, yeah. I mean, just quickly, that story is a story of perseverance. When I got out of Cornell, I applied to 4 business schools, and my reach school, the one that I dreamed of getting into, was Wharton, which was at the time, I think, the #1 ranked business school in America. It's still right up there. But so I got accepted at the other 3, and I got put on the waiting list at Wharton. And I thought, oh, man, I'm on the waiting list, and you just don't know if you're going to get in. And so I called the admissions office, and I kind of made my case. I said, I really need to go to this school. I really want this, please consider me. And of course, I got the brush off that was, well, sir, we have a process, and, in the month of May, we'll look at how many availability slots we have, and then we have a formula, and you'll be notified. There's nothing you can do. And so I was discouraged, but then I decided I would call every single week, and I think I talked to the same admissions person every single week, and I kept making the case to her that why I wanted to go to that school, and, I really wanted it badly. And sure enough, in the month of May, I got a letter that I'd been let in with a very large scholarship as well. And I don't know exactly what happened behind the scenes, but I have to believe that she probably said in one of the meetings, I've got a guy at Cornell who is dying to go to this school. maybe we should let him in, So I think that might be what happened.
Well, again, it's a great story there. It's part of the plans I have for you. And so if you do not know of his background, you'll certainly appreciate that. But let me just give you an overview first of the book. 20 chapters. Most of those have a theme, whether it is surrender, sacrifice, excellence, humility, integrity, courage, forgiveness, balance, humor. And then there's a scripture verse as well as a leadership principle. And I'll just pick the one on sacrifice, because here I think you see a very clear delineation between leadership books. And like you, I've read some leadership books. I was even asked one time in my church to teach on leading like Jesus, and those kinds of things. But there is a fundamental difference, and that's why you wrote the book, between some of these more secular leadership books and ones that, in your case, that are based upon biblical principles. And as an individual that is called to be a believer in the corporate world or in ministry, sometimes it involves making choices or even sometimes making a sacrifice.
Well, that's right. I mean, my point is that, each one of us as a follower of Christ is called first to be an ambassador for Christ in the world. We are a sent people. As the Father has sent me, I now send you, said Jesus to his disciples. And so that means that our calling is more important than our career, right? So our calling to be an ambassador for Christ, wherever we work or live or, spend our time, is really more important than any other considerations, career, financial issues. And so that means that on every one of our business cards, we ought to have the words title ambassador for Christ.
Yes. And
then, our secondary role is whatever we happen to do, teacher, administrator, leader, manager, etc. And so it starts with sacrifice. It starts with, in fact, the subtitle of that chapter is career suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And, what I try to make the point I try to make is that we need to lay down our careers and everything else in our life before Christ to do with as he pleases, and then get that right orientation and priority in our lives.
And so, again, one of the things that you certainly talk about here are some of these principles. Let me take one. Excellence is another one, because in Colossians 3, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you'll receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you're serving. And that, I think, if nothing else, Richard, illustrates again the fact that as Christians, we should be the best employees, the most gracious, the most hardworking, the most diligent, the most dependable, shouldn't we?
Well, absolutely. I mean, excellence is important because that is a large part of our witness in our workplaces, that we are people of excellence, people of integrity. I talk a lot about character. These values that I write about comprise our character. But excellence is important because I make the point, Kerby, that your character is more important than your accomplishments. Now,
Yes.
That's kind of heresy in the business world because accomplishments are everything, right?
Yes.
Did you hit your numbers? Did you make your goal? Did you achieve your strategy? And so, but the Lord is more concerned about our character than our accomplishments. Now, the flip side of that coin is God calls us to work with excellence. So we should accomplish a lot of things because we're working with diligence and excellence, and we're using the giftedness he's given us. And we're always doing our best. I mean, that's all anybody asks of us, is that we do our best. And if we've done our best and we've done it, faithful to God, then we can trust him for the outcomes.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue on for a few more minutes as we talk about this book. Came out in March, Lead Like It Matters to God, Values-Driven Leadership in a Success-Driven World. We'll talk about integrity, maybe balance. Those were chapters that certainly were meaningful to me. Might even mention, we may not get to it, but one chapter made me laugh out loud was the one on humility. I don't know if we'll get to that one, but if you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to know a little bit more about leadership from a Christian point of view, and if you're a leader, and almost all of us in one way or another do leadership, either in our home, in our church, or ministry, business, I think you'll really benefit from this new book, and it is published by InterVarsity Press. Might be able to find it in a local bookstore, but we also have material about it and information about it on our website at pointofview.net.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
What if Christians and Christian institutions that provide so many social services went on strike? That is a question that Addison Del Mastro asked in The American Conservative. He reminds us of the book by Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged. She proposes the question of what would happen if entrepreneurs in America decided to go on strike because of an increasingly overbearing regulatory state. The book documents the dystopia the country falls into. While I doubt that Christians and Christian groups will ever go on strike, it is a great thought experiment. Addison De Mastro explains that many of the services Americans take for granted are provided by churches and Christian organizations. One example is healthcare. John Stonestreet, in his Breakpoint commentary, wrote, "No Christianity, no hospitals. Don't take Christian contributions for granted." Catholic, Baptist, and Methodist hospitals can be found all over the country. He documented that in at least 30 communities, the Catholic hospital is the only hospital within a 35-mile radius. Education is another area where Christian involvement has been key. Christians run thousands of private schools that usually meet or exceed the quality of the public schools. The Catholic Church or various Protestant denominations or churches run more than 7 in 10 of the private schools in America. Churches also minister to the needy and marginalized in society. There are soup kitchens and outreaches to the poor and homeless. Churches also provide meals for the homebound. They provide marriage counseling as well as psychological counseling. Christian organizations place children in foster care and adoption, and Christian groups run pregnancy resource centers. You know, Christians aren't going on strike, but if they did, America would be a very different place indeed. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
He's out with us today, Richard Stearns, as we talk about his new book, Lead Like It Matters to God, Values-Driven Leadership in a Success-Driven World, and it is published by InterVarsity Press, and we have information about it on our website at pointofview.net. You perhaps will be able to find it in your local bookstore, but we have that there in case you wanted to get it in hardback or Kindle. And Richard, I thought we might talk about the issue of integrity. That's one place where there is a significant amount of overlap between the non-Christian world and the Christian world. You even have a quote in there from Peter Drucker. It's more important to do the right thing than to do things right. And yet we do seem to have a gap, an integrity gap sometimes in the world around us. And it does seem to me that that provides an opportunity for Christians to stand out. If they are dependable, if you know that what you see on the outside is what's going on in the inside, if integrity is who you are when no one is watching, that I think is going to stand out in the business world and frankly sometimes even in ministry.
Well, that's right, Kerby. And if, I write about these 17 leadership values, and I would have to put integrity right at the top of that list as one of the most important, because being a person of integrity, and integrity is more than, somebody you think, well, I have integrity. I don't steal or cheat or lie. But integrity is a lot more than that. It's being a person of your word. It's being a person of character, a trustworthy person who what you see is what you get. And a person of integrity is like a magnet in an organization because everyone wants to work for a leader who demonstrates integrity in their relationships and in their conduct. Everybody wants to work for someone where it's clear where you stand and it's clear where they stand, and you can trust them with the promises they make to you and the commitments they make to you. And a leader of integrity creates a culture within which people can flourish, right? Because they're not worried about the office politics so much, because they know that the boss has got this. They can trust that person, man or woman, and they can work to their best ability because they're not worried about all of this, kind of slimy office politics that you encounter in so many different places.
And again, when you talk about trust, you have an earlier chapter on trust. It's the idea, of course, trusting God, but also that just sense of trust as well. You've got my back. In other words, you don't say one thing to me in a corporate boardroom, and then when the doors are shut, you're telling everybody else, well, I think this guy's a jerk, and, I certainly don't want to actually give him a chance to be successful here and all the rest. And so there is a sense in which that can pervade a culture, and when you don't have integrity, it becomes sort of a toxic emotion that runs through a business, a ministry, even a family. So very well said. And go ahead.
Yeah, and the other thing about integrity is a leader with integrity, it's not all about them, right? The integrity they have is that I'm here to look out for your well-being as well as my employees or my team. And it's not just about my personal ambitions. I'm not looking at you as just a pawn on a chessboard to be used so that I can further my career. I'm looking at you with the responsibility as your leader to take care of you and to watch out for you and to help you become successful as well. And that's part of integrity as well.
Let's get to the chapter on balance, because we've talked about that quite a bit. I've actually had individuals here, sometimes women especially, talk about trying to come up with a work-life balance, all work and no play. I love one of the quotes you have here is, work is a rubber ball. You drop it, it'll bounce back. The other four balls, family, health, friends, spirit, are made of glass. If you drop one of these, they can get scuffed, marked, damaged, even shattered. And since we're getting close to Halloween, you have a great story when one day it was all hands on deck. I think at that time you were COO at Lennox, and you were making a big decision about a factory in Pennsylvania. Well, it starts at 9, goes to noon, goes to 2, goes to 3, 4, 5. Now, you had actually wanted to take your kids out for trick-or-treating and all the rest, and by the time it got to 5 o'clock, you had the wisdom, maybe even the courage to point out the fact that you had a prior engagement with your family, and instead of everybody wanting to fire you on the spot, although I guess there was an audible gasp when you made that statement, it actually illustrates again the need for balance. Can you explain?
Yeah, I think balance is ultimately all about making tough choices, because work will always demand more of you than you should be willing to give, right? Because workplaces are very demanding and they can consume all of your time. And I made some choices. I was the chief operating officer of Lennox, but this was a meeting with the CEO, my boss, and probably 25 vice presidents. And it was a very critical meeting in the boardroom to make a very big decision. And at about 5:30 that day, I literally raised my hand to the boss and I said, Jim, I have 3 little kids at home waiting to go trick-or-treating with their dad. Today is Halloween, and I'm sorry, but I have to excuse myself from the meeting. And there was an audible gasp because these 25 vice presidents thought they had just witnessed someone committing career suicide. But you see, I'd made a commitment to my family and my kids, and I knew that this decision could wait until tomorrow. We could reconvene in the morning. And to my delight, the CEO said, why, Rich, I don't have little kids at home anymore. You go. You've got to be home with your kids. I'll bring you up to date in the morning. And I got up and left the meeting, but 25 other people stayed there and left their kids, maybe to go trick-or-treating with their at-home parent. And so those are the choices we make, and they're tough choices sometimes. And sometimes you have to negotiate with your boss to say, look, I need this flexibility in my life. Maybe I need to be able to arrive 15 minutes late every day because I have to drop my kids off at school or something like that. So you have to fight for work-life balance.
And again, part of it has to do with having the right mindset. You know, Romans 12:1 and 2 talks about the fact that we should not be conformed to this world, or Colossians 3:28 talks about the idea that we should not be taken captive by false ideas. We oftentimes see that in terms of not being taken captive or conforming to false theology or cults or things of that nature, but there's also this workaholism mindset and a number of others. And so your values really get tested when all of a sudden some of those values that you hold dear come in conflict with the world, and that's why you sort of have to think this through ahead of time. So just before I run out of time, let's talk about how people can use this book, because the way it's written, obviously any one of us that are in positions of leadership benefit tremendously by the way you've put it together. But because you have a whole section where you actually do have a scripture verse and some leadership principles, I think the way you've put this together could really be used in a small group setting and something that people could use to teach leadership inside their church or even inside their business.
Well, absolutely. I actually wrote it to be somewhat in a devotional format. So if you're a leader of any stripe at any level in your work or in your community or in your church, you could just open up to one of these chapters and read it. Let's say that day you need some courage. Just open up, read the chapter on courage. That day you're wrestling with work-life balance. Just read the chapter on balance. It can be read with kind of a devotional idea in mind. And this leadership book, many leadership books make us feel insecure. I'll never be that good. I'll never master that new paradigm. This is a leadership book that is meant to comfort you that what's most important about your leadership is your character, not the accomplishments, not all of the things you can master, not all of the skill sets you either have or don't have. So I wanted this to be an encouragement to leaders to say, God's got your back. Just go into that workplace, be that person of character, be an ambassador for Christ, and trust Him for the outcome, and you'll have a great day at work.
And well, again, I encourage all of us to recognize that the world is watching us, and whether you're in a position of leadership, as many of us are, and I think all of us in one way or another have some people following us. It could be just a peer group, or it could be the leadership we provide in a family, but it could be in a business, it could be in a ministry, whatever. I think you'll benefit from this, but we need to really establish that and show in our life and our way in which we go about life to actually demonstrate the truthfulness of the gospel in our lives. So again, Lead Like It Matters to God, Values-Driven Leadership in a Success-Driven World. It is published by InterVarsity Press, written by Richard Stearns. And Richard, as always, great to have you on the program.
Thanks so much, Kerby. God bless.
Going to take a break. When we come back, going to get into some of the issues in the news here. We've posted a couple of articles for you to read. And, of course, don't forget that as you go to the website, you can find out more about this book. You also find that we have an action item here, the Build Back Better Act, which is going to be voted on. So you have that. We got some material about the Texas Heartbeat Law. My Viewpoints commentary today is, just hypothetically, what if Christians went on strike? They aren't. But again, it reminds us how much Christians and Christian institutions contribute to the world. And it's something to think about as we get into some of the conversation we're going to now have about some of the articles we've posted. So let's take a break. We come back, we'll get into that. Next hour, we'll be privileged to have in studio with us Dr. Kathy Koch, founder of Celebrate Kids and author of a couple of books we'll be talking about. We'll be right back.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/sign-up. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, we've posted a couple of articles for you to look at today, and the first one is by Newt Gingrich. And the reason I posted it is sometimes we need to have some material that might help us think about an issue. The one I'll look at in just a minute from Victor Davis Hanson helps us know how to think about what's going on in the military. But in this case, Newt Gingrich not only helps us think about it, but also how to engage others, because some of you are saying, and I certainly agree, need to get some tools so that when I have a discussion with an individual, I maybe know what to say. And this one in particular I thought was very well written, because he talks about the fact that when we talk about what he calls big government socialists, which pretty much now are starting to dominate at least one party, the Democratic Party, they always talk about free programs. And that sounds really good. Free community college, free child care, free dental care, free eye care for Medicare, free public housing, free food stamps, and the list goes on. And of course, he says, don't fall for it. I think all of us probably are wise enough to know that there's no such thing as a free lunch. But he does point out the fact that these visions that have been really expressed for many years by the senator from Vermont, Bernie Sanders, have really kind of infected, he says, the entire leadership now in that party. And by the way, even though he's focusing on the Democratic Party, let's face it, there are a fair number of people in the Republican Party that sort of have the same idea that the solution to every problem is more government. And that is certainly easy to disprove, because as he points out here, you can think of the catastrophe at the border, the disastrous exit from Afghanistan, record inflation, the supply chain woes, to mention just a few, and of course things that have been around long before. Of course, this president's been in office, collapsing urban schools, skyrocketing murder rates, and all sorts of other issues. And then in the midst of all that, say, well, the solution to these problems is more government. Of course, doesn't even really pass the straight face test, though I find more and more people actually saying that with a straight face, because maybe they've bought into it. So he says, we've got to maybe think through how to respond to this keyword free, because it is so attractive. If you are down on your luck, or you have just graduated from college with student debt, or you're thinking about going into college, or you're wondering about how you're going to pay your next bill, the word free really sounds good. But he reminds us that none of the things that are being proposed as free are really free. They are what we call taxpayer-funded programs. When you get a free school lunch program, a taxpayer paid for it. When you get free treatment through Medicaid, a taxpayer had to fund it. When you go to a free government-run school, taxpayers funded the cost. And so you have to begin to understand that what we have right now is that what we need to do, and this gets you to the second page of a very good piece, and I'm summarizing it, as you might imagine, is whenever you hear the word free, insist on calling it taxpayer funded. That is a phrase that used to be used because when we talked about taxpayer funding in the past, people knew what it meant. And when you talk about taxpayer funded, let's not get into the mistaken idea that only the rich are going to pay for it. And an example that I have coming out next week in one of my commentaries is that even though this current president has promised that they will not, and he will not, and his administration will not raise taxes on anyone making more than $400,000 per year, I think you can see the truthfulness of the fact that we're all going to get to pay for it because, well, just like look at the latest proposal here, the IRS wanting to try to get more money, they want to have banks record any transaction of what? $600 or more. Now, if you really were concerned about any kind of individuals that are wealthy not paying, quote, their fair share in taxes, don't you think the minimum level would have been like $1,000 or $5,000? When you talk about $600, that's virtually every one of us in the listening audience right now. And it's, I think, a wake-up call for the fact that middle-class America will indeed pay taxes. And as he points out in this piece, really, there's only a couple of ways that you can fund the government. First of all, borrowing. Well, we are borrowing quite a bit. And the way we borrow it essentially is that we issue treasuries, and then now no longer does Japan buy them, China doesn't buy them, the UK doesn't buy them, we buy them. The Federal Reserve buys them, and so basically we're just running up monopoly money debt. So that's the first issue. The second is to raise taxes, and he reminds us that you might even begin to think that, well, those taxes aren't going to affect me, but then on the third page goes on and reminds us, just a minute here, we are starting to see a level of inflation that in a sense is an indirect tax, not to mention the fact that if you even raise taxes on corporations, what do? They pass the cost on to you. And so we see this as well. He points out that every person who buys gasoline or heating oil is paying more. Stephen Morey says in his Unleash Prosperity line, pointed out that energy costs are up 24%. And that will virtually hit every American, no matter what your income is. You might say, well, I don't drive a car that often. Do you eat? Well, then again, the inflation there. According to the Wall Street Journal, beef prices are up 17% over the last 12 months. Fresh fish and seafood up 10%. You can go down the list and recognize that there is no such thing as a free lunch. And so one of the recommendations he makes, and I think it's a very good one, is the next time somebody says, well, I'm really for free college. You mean taxpayer-funded college. I'm really for free health care. You mean taxpayer-funded health care, because this does not just simply come out of thin air. The government, to even try to provide some of this, either has to borrow money, and that as a result is creating, I think, a great deal of the inflation, or they have to raise taxes. And of course, there's really a desire right now to raise taxes, but somewhere along the line, it has to be paid for, and one way or the other, either directly through taxes or indirectly through inflation, you will indeed be paying for it. Let's get to the second article by Victor Davis Hanson. What happened to the beloved military? I would highly recommend this to those of you that have served in the military, maybe have somebody serving in the military right now, because it is very well written. Victor Davis Hanson will be on with us next week, and we'll talk about some of the things in his new book. But here he really is concerned that the higher echelon of the U.S. military is becoming dysfunctional, and pointed out a number I'd never seen before, but we have entirely too many individuals at the highest level, admirals and generals. There are too many, really, for the size of the current military. We now have 3 times the number of 4-star admirals and generals that we had during World War II, when we were fighting essentially an existential war for the survival of this country and of the Western world. And he also points out that there's been a gradual shift in the agendas of the military leadership, which has resulted in too many emphasis on domestic, cultural, social, and political issues rather than fighting and winning a war. And then he goes into some details, and I'll cover some before the break and then some after. But he talks about, for example, the first thing to look at is what he calls the Uniform Code of Military Justice. He says that needs to be enforced, not selectively applied on the basis of rank. And what he points out is officers below the upper ranks, below, say, General Admiral, will face severe penalties for disparaging in personal terms an administration. The previous administration under Donald Trump, the current administration under Joe Biden, and as a result are given a free pass if they are higher up to actually make all sorts of disparaging comments about some of those individuals that are actually part of the civilian control of the government, rather than the military control of the government. So the first thing he says is that we need to rethink how we even do some of these issues. And when we come back from the break, what I want to do is very quickly go through 4 very important action steps that he has come up with in terms of addressing some of this in terms of the military. And then that leads kind of naturally into something we're going to be talking about in much greater detail tomorrow, and that is the fact that we now have, for example, the evidence that China has tested a hypersonic nuclear-capable missile, and that they are in the process of actually locating all sorts of missile sites in China. By the way, if you're not familiar with this is a kind of missile that is a first-strike missile, not a defensive missile. And the reaction that we got from the intelligence community was simply, we have no idea how they did this. Matter of fact, there was an article the other day in which the Defense Department said, there's just no way we could fund what is called a hypersonic missile. Well, China has one. We don't, and we won't. So we'll talk about some of that right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Rick, once again, let's just for a few more minutes talk about this idea of what we could do to reform the military and make it more efficient. Then I want to get into a few comments about China. And then, of course, next hour we are going to have in studio with us Dr. Kathy Koch, and we'll talk about 8 great smarts. Discover and nurture your child's intelligences. I think this is going to be really encouraging for those of you that are parents or grandparents. And, of course, we'll give you a chance to ask questions or make comments. She'll also be talking about another book that deals with the issue of homeschooling. So whether you have kids in Christian school, public school, or homeschool, we'll be talking about all of those resources in just a minute. Again, the second article we've posted today by Victor Davis Hanson, What Happened to the Beloved Military? And he does have 4 points. I'll just mention them real quickly and then get into some brief comments about China, which we'll get into in some detail tomorrow. And that is, he says, first of all, the Joint Chiefs of Staff have gone astray. There are laws, he says, that have been passed 1947, 1952, 1986, which explicitly defined and incrementally but steadily narrowed the mission of this. It's more of an advisory body, but nevertheless, it's made up, of course, of 4-star officers in the respective branches of the military, but by statute, they're not responsible for carrying out the orders from the president as related to the Secretary of Defense. Instead, they're led by a chairman and to present various options during a time of debate. And yet the present chairman, he says, General Mark Milley, if media accounts are accurate, has apparently violated both the spirit and the letter of the law. Of course, we've talked about this before. Things like contacting the Chinese Communist military, which I'll get to in just a minute, and all sorts of other things that obviously are a violation. So the first issue is to look at the Joint Chiefs. Second, he said, the once hallowed Uniform Code of Military Justice, which I just mentioned a minute ago, is now merely a construct. By that he means it's widely ignored to the point, he says, of parody, at least for officers above the rank of colonel who violate Article 88's prohibition of using contemptuous words against the president. Say something against President Donald Trump, no harm, no foul. As we talked about yesterday, a lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps criticizes the botched withdrawal from Afghanistan. He gets fined, and I think you know only so well that. And he goes through what an incredible number of things, many of which I'd forgotten about, that were said about the previous president and, of course, other presidents as well, and how in the past we dealt with some of those issues, and now we simply almost turn a blind eye to it. Number 3, he talks about the selective politicization of military has now reached dangerous levels when, of course, he talks about ordering tens of thousands of federal troops, barriers and barbed wire in Washington, D.C., the fact they were kept there for the longest period of time. And, of course, we've talked about that whole issue. And then just even the whole looking for finding individuals that might disagree with this administration and really sort of deputize all sorts of people in the military as social justice warriors is a really important point that he makes. But it brings us to the fourth one, and then these types of politicization and violation of a variety of laws do come at a price, either in distracting the military command from its primary mission of defeating the enemy and securing victory in American conflicts, or contextualizing such failure through the embrace of social activism. And you might remember the other day we talked about Victor Davis Hanson saying that when you see some of these statements about wokeism in the corporate world, so we'll look at the private sector for just a minute, you wonder, is it because they're becoming so woke that they're now incompetent, or are they using wokeism to cover their incompetence? And so just as you have seen some of this in the private sector, we also seem to be seeing some of this in the public sector with the military. So very good piece, well written as always. Looking forward to our conversation with Victor Davis Hanson on Monday. But let me just say for a minute, as we're going to be probably spending more time tomorrow talking about China, the October issue of Outlook magazine is one that if you are a donor to Point of View, you probably have already received. I have an article in there about China's global ambitions, and that one goes on for some time. Ivy Nichols has the one on countering China's long gain. And then also we have Liberty McCarter, Human Rights in Hong Kong. Well, we could almost do a part 2 to the Outlook magazine, because even though we sort of mentioned Taiwan, we did not even talk about something that has just now been announced, and that is that China has now tested a hypersonic nuclear-capable missile. And this has led some military experts to say, We have no idea how they did this. And the test was one where they launched the rocket and that it was able to actually achieve a low orbit. If you wonder what a hypersonic vehicle is, this is one that travels at Mach 5 or faster. Now, there are people that have simply said that since China is not a party to any arms limit treaties, they can continue to develop these. And more importantly, this weapon would allow them to completely bypass defense systems. To put this in more perspective, we are starting to see that now it flies so much faster than the speed of time. It not only would allow them to evade defense systems, but would provide little or no warning of an impending attack. And of course, Gary Bauer has said this all caught the intelligence community's flat-footed. And he said, what our intelligence agencies get paid for? Maybe we should go back and ask some very important questions about this. One of the articles I'll post for tomorrow by Rich Lowry goes into the fact that this is maybe a little bit like the Sputnik moment. For those of us that are much older, when Sputnik actually circled for the first time the globe, this was a Russian satellite. Americans realized that Russians were ahead of us in the space war. This one reminds us that there is a tremendous missile gap, and we're very far behind there as well. And as the editors of the Wall Street Journal have pointed out in their editorial today, we also now know that there are hundreds of new missile silos in the Chinese desert, almost certainly for nuclear missiles. And this isn't the behavior of a country trying to defend itself, but actually evidence of a country that actually is becoming more and more provocative. And the editors go on to say that it's important, they said, to understand that the next major war won't look like anything like the last one. The U.S. homeland, of course, was spared from most of World War II's destruction. The next conflict will involve such things as cyber attacks, hypersonic missiles, unmanned vehicles using artificial intelligence, and the rest. And they are saying we're not convinced that we're headed to war at the moment, but it does appear a little bit to me like China is ready to do what it can to begin to be the next global superpower and to actually begin to pass us all by. And one of the other things Gary Bauer points out is if you look at the Wall Street Journal article came out the other day, you have all of these youth in China that are burning with patriotic fever for China. Contrast that with the fact that we have been telling our students here for the last 2 or 3 decades that this is an evil country, and after demonizing our founders as evil men, instead in China they're lauding their leaders. And again, in a battle, who would you want to bet on? Those that are willing to give their lives because they believe in China, or the people that are not so sure they want to defend this country because it's full of evil and a very sad history? And of course, all of this, which we'll talk about tomorrow, is coming as we get closer to the 2022 Winter Games held in China. So we'll talk about all of that tomorrow, but my assignment for you is if you have an Outlook magazine, the October issue, read it, because that's my homework for you, and we'll talk about some of that tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas recently said, "The Declaration of Independence has weathered every storm for 245 years. It birthed a great nation. It abolished the sin of slavery, and it endeavored to address its effects. While we have failed the Declaration time and again, and the ideals of the Declaration time and again, I know of no time," said Thomas, "when the ideals have failed us." While some see our founding as fatally flawed and promote ideas that have failed every time they've been tried, at Point of View, like Justice Thomas, we still believe in America's ideals. And if you do too, make a difference today. Join the Truth Team as we promote the unchanging truth that gave us liberty and prosperity. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-3776. 5151. The original Americans responded to the call. Will you? pointofview.net/team and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. This hour we have in studio with us Dr. Kathy Koch. And Dr. Koch, of course, is an individual that you may know as the founder of Celebrate Kids, an individual that actually speaks quite often at CareNet and Summit Ministries Colson Center, Teach Them Diligently. And, of course, we've heard her on Focus on the Family. Matter of fact, in Kirk Cameron's movie Connect, as well as, of course, she has published 5 books with Moody. Maybe this is number 6. I don't know if it's 5 or 6, but this one, 8 Great Smarts. Discover and nurture your child's intelligence. For those of you that have homeschoolers, I'm going to talk about a book that she actually did the foreword to that is similar to this, but Dr. Koch. And Kathy, how are you doing today?
I'm fabulous. Thanks for inviting me back to the show.
You seem really happy. I don't know. Maybe it has to do with the Green Bay Packers 5-1. So everybody knows you from Wisconsin, and you certainly have loved that. But it is
their first loss was disgusting.
Yes, the Saints. And I remember the first one.
Yes, but I was not worried.
Yeah, we're not worried, and it looks very good. So anyway, just have a little bit of fun with that. But again, we are going to be talking about what are called multiple intelligences. And I've loved how you've taken some of the material from Howard Gardner and others and put this in a readable format, because almost all of us at one time or another didn't feel good about ourselves. I've shared this before. In the second grade, I was put in the slow group, and I actually had to do work over the recess because something just didn't click. But eventually, I think most people figured it probably clicked on.
Yes.
And there are some that say, look, I'm just not book smart. I'm not logic smart. Well, you might be music smart, or you might be nature smart, or something else. And so explain this for just a few minutes, because I've seen you encourage parents and kids to realize I really have value and worth.
Yes, because that's such a good point, Kerby, because they don't feel as valuable as others if they don't feel smart. They feel gypped. They can be angry at God. So one of my passions in helping moms, dads, teachers, and kids understand this is that it changes your view of yourself, others, and of God as your creator. So powerful. Howard Gardner is the researcher who's done all the fancy MRIs and all the brain work to discover that all of us have the capacity for being smart in 8 different ways. And smart's a power word. If I don't feel smart, I might not show up, if you will. I might drop out. I might not believe in myself, which is really dangerous. Word smart people think with words. When we're being logic smart, we think with questions. When we're being picture smart, we think with our eyes in visuals. When we think with music smart, we think with rhythms and melodies. When we're being body smart, we think with movement and touch. When we're being nature smart, we think with patterns. When we're being people smart, we think with other people, have dialogue and discussion. And when we're being self smart, we think deeply inside of ourself, and we crave quiet, peace, privacy, and space. And all of us have all 8, which is why it can be confusing at times.
Yes, well, it certainly can. Let me just mention that the foreword by John Stone Street, and I've been watching some of the things John Stone Street's been doing. I saw you show up a couple of times, so you certainly have a great relationship with him. And by the way, there is endorsements by just a veritable who's who of individuals. Almost all of them on these 2 pages have actually been on the program at some time or another, which just shows how significant it was. But John does a good job of just talking about his daughters. I think we get a little bit of a story about Abigail and a couple of the others, but it was perfect because it then, even before you get into the book, realize that a parent can then begin to understand a little bit more about the different kind of personalities and abilities of their children.
Because we want to connect, right?
Yeah.
Like part of the passion of any parent, grandparent, whomever would be to know their children and to connect well so that we can pass on our values and minister love, hope, and healing to them. And of course, all children want to be known, right? We want to be known. And this is a really practical way to figure it out. Instead of just saying to a child, man, I like that, or that was good, we can say things like, man, you're creative because you're picture smart, or you ask such great questions. You're so curious. I think God made you logic smart. And that can really change you.
I think so. Now, again, anytime I've ever heard you speak, and I've heard you speak at various events for children and Christian writers and everything else, you always talk about the 5 core needs that need to be met. And so before we get into these, again, some people might be writing real quick and say, I didn't get all those down. Well, we're going to go through those individually. But before we do, there's another aspect, and that's all those 5 core needs you talk about.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, right? We believe at Celebrate Kids, and the biblical, it's not just my belief, that we have a need for security, who can I trust? We have a need for identity, who am I? We have a need for belonging, who wants me? Who would want to connect with me? We have a need for purpose. Why did God bother making me? Why am I alive? And then, Kerby, we have a need for competence. What do I do well? And all 5 of those need to be met in the triune God first and foremost. He's the one that answers all of our questions. In addition to that, though, when children and adults know how they're smart, they're more secure in themselves. They will believe with more confidence that they can do well at a church, school, home setting. If they know who they are, we believe that identity controls behavior. So if we don't know who we are, we might as well stay in bed all day. Then we have a need for belonging. If I know somebody who's nature smart and I want to get to know them better, I can go for a walk in a park rather than sit in a dark den and watch a movie. So the core needs and the smarts do relate. And then purpose, why am I alive? Here you and I are both word smart, logic smart, on the radio, podcasting, writing books, creating thought, if you will, because of how God designed us to be. And then competence, what do I do well? The heart cry of every child, right? Well, what am I going to do well today? And when I know that I have security, identity, belonging, and purpose, I will believe I can be competent. So this idea that we're smart, we're not just good, we're not just clever, we're not just creative, but we're all those things because God made us smart. It's very, very powerful. And it's not egotistical to know that you're smart. It's egotistical to say, well, I'm smarter than you are. That playground language, which is a bully, mentality. But it's okay for kids to know, hey, I'm smart too.
Yes. And again, to see how God has made them. And so that's exactly what we're trying to do. Just before we get into some of those, and one other question that you try to address, and that is, how can I identify my child's multiple intelligence strengths or my grandchild? Because it's interesting. By the way, I might just mention you say some very nice things about your grandparents. And so there are, I'm sure, quite a number of grandparents listening to this right now saying, okay, I've already raised my kids, but I really would like to maybe pass some of this wisdom on to my grandchildren. So how can they use this book and find this out for their children or grandchildren?
Yeah, I really appreciate that, because today's grandparents are just, I think, more desperate than ever to get to know their grandkids, and technology is in the way of that so often. So I do appreciate you bringing that up. One of the really practical ways that we can figure out how kids are smart or grandkids are smart is to ask what drives us nuts about them, right? Do you have a chatty Cathy, which was my nickname? Do you have somebody who wiggles and moves? Do you have somebody that draws all the time? Do you have somebody who hums and whistles or toe taps or drums their fingers and it's about to drive you nuts? So what drives you nuts? What do they do in their spare time would be another thing to look at. What do they spend their money on? If you're a grandmother and you love your granddaughter and you give her a $20 bill for a surprise, what does she spend that money on might tell you what she's smart in the moment. What do they do well in school? Certainly, do they gravitate towards science and math or creative writing, or do they love the debate team? Is band the thing that keeps them in school? And then when they do talk, everybody is word smart. Everybody does talk. Everybody is logic smart. Everybody asks questions. What do we talk about? And what do we ask questions about? And the answers to those questions can also help us identify the smarts that are awake in the moment and that they're really gravitating toward.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about 8 great smarts. You might want to number 1 to 8. Of course, you really want to get a copy of the book, and we have a link there as well that you can get from Celebrate Kids. Let's take a break. We will continue our conversation with Dr. Kathy Koch right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
What if Christians and Christian institutions that provide so many social services went on strike? That is a question that Addison Del Mastro asked in The American Conservative. He reminds us of the book by Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged. She proposes the question of what would happen if entrepreneurs in America decided to go on strike because of an increasingly overbearing regulatory state. The book documents the dystopia the country falls into. While I doubt that Christians and Christian groups will ever go on strike, it is a great thought experiment. Addison Del Mastro explains that many of the services Americans take for granted are provided by churches and Christian organizations. One example is healthcare. John Stonestreet, in his Breakpoint commentary, wrote, "No Christianity, no hospitals. Don't take Christian contributions for granted." Catholic, Baptist, and Methodist hospitals can be found all over the country. He documented that in at least 30 communities, the Catholic hospital is the only hospital within a 35-mile radius. Education is another area where Christian involvement has been key. Christians run thousands of private schools that usually meet or exceed the quality of the public schools. The Catholic Church or various Protestant denominations or churches run more than 7 in 10 of the private schools in America. Churches also minister to the needy and marginalized in society. There are soup kitchens and outreaches to the poor and homeless. Churches also provide meals for the homebound. They provide marriage counseling as well as psychological counseling. Christian organizations place children in foster care and adoption, and Christian groups run pregnancy resource centers. You know, Christians aren't going on strike, but if they did, America would be a very different place indeed. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we're going to have a conversation for a while here with Dr. Kathy Koch, but if you would like to join us a little bit later, we will open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212. New book out. It's published by Moody. You can certainly find it in your local bookstore, but we have a link there to get 8 Great Smarts. A little bit later, I'm going to talk about 8 Great Smarts for homeschoolers, because that's one that you've actually done an endorsement for, but let's look on yours first. The first one, of course, I am word smart. I think with words. I think most people have an understanding of that, but there are probably a few things that people might not necessarily understand how that really fits together. Can you help us out?
You know, let me say this. The reason it's first in the book is that it's what I call a school smart. Because what do we do all day in school? We read, write, speak, and listen. And so children who have a lot of brain cells in that part of the brain will feel best about themselves in a school, even a church setting. But praise God for his creativity to give us so many different ways of being smart. So it is powerful. It is speaking, reading, writing, and listening. It can mean a large vocabulary. It can mean they just love the spoken word. By the way, one of the things that's really fun about word smart people is we really don't need an audience.
Yeah.
Like if you listen to me and talk back, that's like frosting on the cake of life. But those of us who are word smart, we simply love to talk.
Yes. And you're very gifted at that, obviously. But some of these kids might say, well, I think I'm this, but I don't have a very good language. Mm-hmm. My parents were readers, but I'm not a reader. Mm-hmm. So you actually address some of that in the chapter too, don't you?
You know, it's interesting, Kerby. As an example, I don't read a lot of fiction. I'm much more of a logic smart person than I am a picture smart person. And so I don't think with my eyes. I don't think with pictures. And so when I read history or fiction, it doesn't come alive in my mind. I don't see the explorer putting his foot into the Mississippi River. I don't see the mean sheriff getting mad at the criminal. And so I don't read a lot of fiction. I read a lot of nonfiction, a lot of logic, smart, truth-based things. Now, that's partly also true because of what I do for a living and what we're called to do in the ministry. But again, there's all the variety, right? If you have somebody who loves poetry, that would be music and word together. They always work in tandem. They don't ever work really alone.
Yes. You also have some, when they grow up, careers and education. That's really important. You also talk about spiritual growth and the risk of pride. So talk about some of that, because this is why I thought this each one of these chapters was so good, because you not only talk about the positives, you talk about the negatives, and you also talk about future careers. So you really give us the full meal deal, as we like to say.
I really appreciate that, right? There's information for the learning part of it. There's also a section about friendship, how you can relate to people who are like you and different from you. There is that career section because people are desperate to figure out, why am I the who I am and what can I do in my future? And then hobbies, even, and how to serve. And then, pride, like for word smart people, if we're not careful, we can, the negative of word smart, we could gossip, tease, name call, impress with our vocabulary, and always demand the last word. Yeah. So we can sin within our strengths. In fact, I would say, Kerby, and I think you would agree, that the devil doesn't care about our weaknesses. The devil cares about the things that we can do well for the kingdom of God. So he's going to destroy word smart people, and we'll become prideful in our vocabulary, prideful in all that we know, prideful in our ability to impress people with what we know.
Again, that's just one of the chapters. I'll keep the train moving down the road, but each one of these chapters is just full of great insight. So let me just mention that if you find yourself saying, okay, that's me, well, then she gives you some really good ideas about how to strengthen those particular abilities, some of the struggles you might face, some of the issues of, in this case, pride or sin. So it's just really well done.
Thank you.
So you have thought through so much of this. But I'll move to the second one. We've talked about, of course, this idea that a person is really good with words. I'm word smart. Logic smart, I think, with questions.
Right.
Now, if you have teenagers, you know that the questions come again and again and again and again. So some of that is just that age. The matter of fact, they talk about the trivium, and sometimes they're the ones asking all the questions when they're in the teen years. But a person that asks questions at the age of 2 or 3 and always has a question, probably that's a logic smart, right?
Absolutely. They're driven by a need to know. They're cause-effect, comparison, contrast thinkers. They are curious to the extent that it could be hurtful. Like you could say, don't touch that, and they actually touch it right in front of you because they want to know logically, why doesn't mommy want me to touch that? So it can actually get them into trouble. As logic smart people can solve problems, they can also create problems for other people to solve. Academically, it's probably math and science where this would reside, and it's why it's number 2 in my list, actually, because again, in school, we ask and answer questions all day long, either discussion as you and I are doing here, or in the written work of school.
And they might do very well in debate and a variety of other things. Might be good bookkeepers, accountants, things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I would say too, they can actually love the debate. That could be the negative for them. If you're word and logic, you can argue well. Think on your feet well and debate well. And we have a lot of that going on in our culture, right? People who are debating for the sake of debate, they have no intention of being persuaded that there's another opinion. They just love doing what they do. And that would be what I would consider word logic gone bad, because that's not why God gave you those gifts.
And again, you also talk about strengthening logic smart, asking what if, but also the struggles when rules don't work. How does that relate?
Yeah, for sure. Logic smart people love it when things make sense. And so, everything from masking to the vaccine to the quarantine, all of that is made logic smart people probably more angry than other people. Biblically, it would be things like, why does God let bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people? Those are legitimate questions that are going to come from the heart, mind, and soul of the logic smart person. They love it when things make sense.
One other point is that because of that, they may be more likely to be the analyzers or the worriers, right? The chronic worriers.
Yes. In fact, my mom, just a quick story, my mom came to faith in Christ late in life. She's a wonderful woman. My brother and I were raised in church, but not by believers. And I'm very, very grateful. I love to say, don't ever stop praying for your parents. And after my mom came to faith in Christ, she still worried and wondered, and she was angry with herself and would say to me, Kathy, I know I have legitimate faith. I know that I've trusted the Lord. I'm reading the Bible more. I'm taking sermons more seriously. Why am I still worried? And I was able to help her understand that although worrying isn't a great thing to be, I suppose. It was rooted in her desire to know things and her mind, which was full of logic. She wanted to understand things, and it felt like worry when she kept asking the same question over and over again.
Once again, the value of this is that you may be thinking about this for your child because that's the subtitle, but you may figure yourself out at an old age as well. So great illustration. One more before we take a break, and that is Picture Smart. I think in pictures. What are these kind of individuals?
Right. These are the kids who get creative with pens and pencils and chalk and markers and sidewalk chalk, and sometimes they even color where they're not supposed to. Picture Smart children will think with pictures in their mind creatively and also on paper. When you turn a page in a book, they look first at the picture. They may have a great memory for the things that they've seen. History is something that they enjoy more than other kids because it comes alive for them. Creative writing is something that they might be good at because as they write, they're picturing the action that they're writing about. So those are academic skills. They'll enjoy the art museum. They'll enjoy investigating things with their eyes that you might actually walk right by and not even see.
Yes, and again, sometimes good photographers and those kinds of things as well as artists. Strengthening them, close your eyes and see some of the struggles, helping them to focus. Oh, those are both problems, aren't they?
Yes, and also, Kerby, Picture Smart people have a tendency to judge a book by its cover.
Oh, yes.
Judge a person by appearance, judge a place. Oh, this restaurant's going to be bad. And they've been there for like 2 seconds, but they have this very quick reaction based on what they see.
For sure.
And we can help them be full of grace and understand what's really going on there.
So again, we are working our way through some of these, but we'll take a break. But let me just mention, we've talked about Word Smart, I think with words, Logic Smart, I think with questions, and Picture Smart, I think with pictures. Now, when we come back from the break, we're going to do a couple of things. First of all, I'm Music Smart, I think with rhythms and melodies, Body Smart, I think with movement and touch, Nature Smart, I think with patterns, I'm People Smart, I think with people, and Self Smart, I think with reflection. And so it's all part of this very good book that is available, and we have a link to our good friends there at Celebrate Kids. So click on the picture there of Kathy, and you will see the book. You can click on there. It gives you all sorts of information, or you can click on her link either way, and that will give you some information about her. And as a result, I would encourage you to go there because also you will find that there are some freebies. We'll talk about that after the break. Endorsements, an assessment, and how to get your copy. So when we come back from the break, I always like to encourage you to go to the website. The website's easy to remember. It's 8, the number 8, Great Smarts. 8greatsmarts.com. And you don't even have to remember all that if you're driving right now because we have the link on the website at pointofview.net. And if you would like to know more about Kathy, of course, we have her information here as well. And I would commend to you her other books and other resources that are there because of that. And as we have mentioned before, we're starting to come out of COVID. So if you'd like to have her come and speak, and I've heard her speak in a lot of different venues, she is available there as well. So you can use that contact point. When we come back, we'll talk about, in addition to getting the book, are there some other resources that are available? And the answer is yes. And so we'll talk about that. But go to the website right now, find some of those materials, and we'll come back and talk about some of the other smarts. And most importantly, if you'd like to join, ask a question a little bit later, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take a break. We'll be back right after these important messages.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Dr. Kathy Koch, and let me just mention we do have a link to 8greatsmarts.com. Now, as you go there, first of all, you can get a copy of the book, which I am holding up right now that you can see. More importantly, you said something that I just discovered. If you get the book, you also get the assessment. Talk about what's available there.
Right. There's a magic code within the pages of the book that will allow you to go and take an assessment for yourself and your kids, and you can take it numerous times if you would like to see how they grow grow. And it's an interesting way to discover a little bit about where are their strengths and where are the ones that are weaker. I still do recommend that you observe their behavior and actually talk with them about it. But the assessment is a great place to start.
I might just mention you can scroll down and then take you to celebratekids.com, or you can follow the link to celebratekids.com. And there you get a picture of you. We also, of course, have the blog, the podcast, which again, podcast. I want you to talk about that in just a minute. But the idea of contacting you, because I know you're just speaking all over the place with a variety of different individuals. Kirk Cameron, I know you're going to be at Pigeon Forge with some of the things happening right now in terms of some of the outreaches and the rest. For example, Teach Them Diligently. But what about the podcast? That's another resource that you're making available.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. It's called Encouraged with Celebrate Kids, because I don't want to waste anybody's time with nonsense. I really do want to encourage them to have hope for today and tomorrow. And I enjoy doing it, just like you obviously enjoy what you do, Kerby. And ours launches just once a week. But it designed mostly for parents, teachers, grandparents, anybody who works with and loves kids, practical, uplifting, fun. I just finished a series about teaching like Jesus, because he was the best teacher who ever lived. And so whether we're homeschooling or teaching Sunday school or just want to support the teachers that our children have, we can discover a lot about teaching by looking at how Jesus taught.
Well, again, we'll get back to 8 great smarts. We've covered a few, so we'll need to make sure we get all 8 in. Music smarts, I think, with rhythms and melodies. Now, the obvious one is your kids just love band or like music, but if they're just always tapping, sometimes that tells you something, doesn't it?
It does. If they're making music, because that's what we do when we're excited. We whistle, toe tap, bebop. You can like it and be good at it. We say ability always starts with interest. So if you have a young child who's interested in music and tends to gravitate toward the glockenspiel in the church nursery as an example, they're probably asking you for piano lessons, but they really don't know that that's what they're doing. But it's important. Music is a big part of life. And it may not be a school smart, if you will. It may not be something that is essential for academic growth, but I think it's essential for life. And it's such a fun thing to have in common with people when it comes to using your time together and getting conversations going about what kind of music do you like.
You're talking about strengthening music smart, prioritizing piano. I'm glad my mother never saw that, although I did have to take piano like everybody else. And also the danger of distraction. So those are a couple of issues that you identify as well, right?
Right.
And so, again, just a couple of key issues. And again, spiritual growth, praise, worship, whistling, and all the rest. Just some great material there. But we'll keep moving. And the next one is body smart. I think with movement and touch. That's my granddaughter. I'm convinced of that. Absolutely. Any kind of movement, any kind of activity, always moving, soccer, anything of that, because just sitting still is just the most difficult thing for her to do. So,
and you know what,
example.
Kerby, it's a way that they're smart. And when I have a chance to talk to kids like your granddaughter, like they look at me like I'm from Mars initially, because they'll say to me, but it only gets me into trouble.
Yes.
And then I have a chance to say, if you move well and move obediently and have self-control and respect for others, then God can use this talent within you for really good purpose. I was a marching band person. I was a drill team captain. I was able to march in a band and twirl a flag and not trip over it. Those are all body smart skills.
Yes.
Soccer, kicking a ball through the goal with both left and right feet. Those are good goals. Trombone as an instrument requires body smart, because you have to be able to feel how far out to slide the slide. So again, an example of the intelligences working together. Car mechanics. I could go on and on with the advantages of being body smart.
One of the questions that people always ask, and you address this, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactive disorder. Is it possible, I think the answer is yes, that some kids that have been identified as that are just really just body smart?
Thanks for bringing that up, right. And we're drugging out of them a great channel that they could use to be successful, which is why the book talks a lot about character, self-respect, self-control, respect for others, humility, obedience, good old-fashioned do what you're told. And yet we have to understand that if they were created by God to have ADD or ADHD or the body smart ability, then we have to let them move productively. And I talk about that in the book, rocking chairs and beanbag chairs and clipboards and fuzzy pipe cleaners that they can feel to get some of that need for touch met, so that they can then concentrate longer on their lessons.
And again, strengthening, get them outside. I love that one.
Yeah.
Oh, it is a struggle. being inside, especially in school where they have to sit still. And so, again, some really significant challenges there as well. But again, being part of the team, learning to respect others, really great material. By the way, at the end, each one of those, you have some ideas about play, whether in that case is to actually play tag or one of the other ones we talked about, telestrations and those kinds of things. So those are all topics. But a couple more real quickly. Nature Smart. We already talked about going outside, but Nature Smart is different because they think in patterns. Can you explain that?
Right. It's kind of related to Picture Smart because their eyes are really important, but they specifically have a very strong ability to remember the pattern. That's how they know it's a blue bird, not a blue jay, because they remember which one has blue on the belly, blue on the wings. I don't have a clue. It's not one of my strengths. Nature Smart people have an ability to know that, this is an elm tree, this is an oak tree. They collect seashells because they love the patterns, things like that. They do love the outdoors. They love the fresh air. And these are kids who may not do all that well in general science or chemistry, but will thrive in geology and biology and meteorology and oceanography. And so this is why, if they're young, they don't like science one week and they love it the next. It's a different part of the brain that's being used.
So good. Again, one way to strengthen that, Nature Smart, is teachable moments. How about that?
Yeah, seeing the butterfly and talking about it and then going home and researching the difference between moths and butterflies. Those kinds of things are real, and we need to take advantage of that no matter what kind of school option we've chosen for our kids.
A couple more. People Smart. I think with people, those oftentimes are easier to identify, but again, give us a couple of the characteristics of People Smart.
I think I'll start with this, Kerby. When we're People Smart, we can read body language appropriately and respond well.
Right.
So I can know if someone is curious or confused by the look of their face. And if we are obedient with our body smart or our People Smart, then we respond to them really well with that. People Smart people also love the conversation. So they're word smart because they talk, but they specifically are willing to have their ideas massaged and changed up by somebody else's thought. So we do enjoy debate, collaboration, discussion, even disagreement is something that a People Smart person would not run from. They might be great politicians, lawyers, teachers, and parents. In fact, if you're a People Smart parent, you can tell your kid's about to get into trouble before she gets into trouble because you can just look at her face or her body and you know what's about to happen.
Well, and again, let's face it, sometimes you women are a little better than us men at reading people's faces, nonverbals, and all the rest. But I do know some people that are People Smart, and I've also seen one other place where they're very good, and they're good lawyers because if they have to pick a jury, they can say, I want this one, I don't want this one, I want this one. The voir dire, when they're going through that, they can pick out people and sometimes give them a characteristic or a name almost instantaneously. And the rest of us look around going, how did you figure that out from those individuals?
Yeah, it's a great example of using a skill for a career. Absolutely. So important. In fact, I would quickly say I think it's the most important of the 8. And the reason I think it's the most important is that idea that we read body language. So it's how children know who's safe when they enter a room full of strangers, right? And it's how they know who to go to and who to stay away from. It also is necessary in our culture that we learn to discuss with a goal of agreeing and agreeing to disagree or agreeing and collaborating and having ideas massaged by other people's ideas versus what I see going on all the time, which is this, talking back and forth with no intent to learn. That doesn't honor anybody and certainly not the Lord. So I would prioritize this smart if I were teaching these 8 to kids.
One last one, self-smart, and that is, I think with reflection. And these oftentimes are individuals with great empathy, sometimes poets and things like that.
Right. And they crave quiet, peace, privacy, and space. They love their own ideas. Sometimes their fault can be prioritizing their own opinions and not being as teachable as we would like them to be. But they are slower thinkers. In fact, a lot of these people have told me, Kerby, that they feel stupid because even if you ask them an easy question, it won't feel easy to them and they want to get it right. So they go deep into themselves, even for a simple question like, what color paper would you like to use for your project? A lot of kids will just say, give me yellow. And this kid is like, I don't know yet. Don't make me choose. So it can be really stressful. It's so important because we need to know what we know and we need to have the confidence to share it, which is where the self-smart, people smart combination becomes really important.
Well, let's take a break, and we've already got a phone call or two. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. That's the 8 great smarts. Discover and nurture your child's intelligences. If we have time in the next segment, we'll just talk a little bit about 8 great smarts for homeschoolers. This is actually written by a different individual, but the forward by Kathy, and I thought you'd like to know about that one too. So let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll take a phone call or two. If you'd like like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. And most importantly, we have links for all of this. You can find out more about Celebrate Kids and 8 Great Smarts and all sorts of other things. Simply go to the website, and everything you need is there. And if you find that we went through it very quickly, well, you might want to download the podcast or go to the YouTube channel, watch it again, or send it to someone else. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes in studio with us, Dr. Kathy Koch, and we're talking about 8 Great Smarts. Just a minute, we're going to talk about 8 Great Smarts for homeschoolers. So you homeschoolers, pay attention because we're going to get into some of that as well. But let's go to the phones, and in Georgia, WLPE. Pam, thank you for calling today.
Yes, thank you for having Dr. Kathy Koch on. I just love her. I've never met her, but her book is fantastic. It helped my little grandson so much. He's body smart, and when he was in pre-kindergarten, the teacher had a clash with his personality, and she viewed him as a threat to her authority. And this little boy makes friends wherever he goes. He just draws kids to him. And I noticed that he had natural rhythm ability. So I told my daughter-in-law, I got her a copy of your book. I said, read it. And they have an older boy, and he's totally opposite from his brother. And I said, I think if you could get him started in music. And they did. They got him a set of drums last Christmas, and he's great on them. They took the kids out of the school they were in. They're doing like a hybrid homeschool Christian school and thing. And your book has made all the difference. And this little boy, as I said, his teacher just didn't know how to handle him. And I'm sure he wasn't the only one in the class. So I want to thank you so much for writing that book. It really, really helped.
Well, Pam, I'm delighted. Thank you so much for calling in. I'm proud of you for recognizing that it was relevant and rescuing your grandson from a negative experience, and how delightful that his parents followed through with your recommendation. Thank you so much for being teachable and for calling in today. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Let me just mention that if you would want to contact her at Celebrate Kids, you might have her come speak for your group or something of that nature, maybe even do a teacher in service. So that is the case. Before I take any more phone calls, and the phone calls are coming in, as I suspected, we do have this book, and it is written by a colleague of yours that you've worked with before, the 8 Great Smarts for Homeschoolers. It's a little different because what she does, although you, of course, do the forward for it, it looks at how to teach some of the course material, math, language, arts, science, social science, fine arts, and those kinds of things. But for our homeschoolers out there, this is kind of like a part 2 of some of the conversations, right?
Right. That's a great way to express it. So my book introduces the smarts and goes into all the details like we've been discussing. And then Tina Hollenbeck took that and said, okay, so if I'm homeschooling and I taught some math principle on Monday and they didn't get it, how can I reteach it on a Tuesday? Or if I know my kids are body smart, how do I teach creative writing? So it's super practical, very uplifting, really an easy skim read, the kind of book you'd want to keep on your shelf to refer to.
So again, let me just encourage you to find some of the links that we've posted on our website. But since we have a number of phone calls, we'll just keep working our way through it. Let's head out to South Carolina this time. David, I appreciate your call.
Yeah, good one. Good afternoon. I just wanted to comment on the ADHD thing. The Marines have a cure for it. It's called structure.
Yes.
My oldest son had ADHD, and he joined the Marines, and it straightened him right up.
Yeah, well, it does provide some structure. You know, it is amazing, David, over the years, I meet these high school kids, and they'll tell me, you know, I am so tired of my parents telling me what to do. And I said, well, then what are you going to do? I said, well, I'm going to join the Marines. and I just can't help but laugh when I hear that. Well, if you don't like people telling you what to do, you have no idea what you just decided to sign up for. But it is a great place, and so thank him for his service, and thank you for sharing that today.
Yeah.
Let's see if we can get just maybe one more phone call in here, and we'll go to Georgia. Curtis, you are on with Kathy Cook.
How are you doing?
Very good.
Kathy Cook.
Great.
All right. Well, just looking for a little advice. You mentioned something on the logic thinker, and my daughter, she's 14. She's extremely logical, you know, and it kind of hit home when you said, why does God let bad things happen to good people and vice versa? And, you know, she just lost her grandfather, and which is my father-in-law. It's like 2 weeks ago. It's very fresh still. Sorry if I'm getting a little upset. But she's getting extremely confused, and her way of logic is starting to drive her away from God instead of closer. And, I mean, we're left to the point where we're just stuck with prayer, and we don't know what to do no more. She thinks that she is gay, and, you know, she thinks that things are not the way they really are. And, you know, I mean, we've been raising her in the Lord, and I just don't know what to do. So any advice, obviously, will be appreciated.
Well, Curtis, first of all, I love that you love her so well. Love goes a far way. Always love her well. And she will know that in the knowing of her knowing, and it can change everything. We have lots of young people, even young adults, really confused today. They want to be happy, and they want things their way because they feel most secure there. But what they do need is the truth from the gospel. You know that. They need your truth. They need you to stick with them, answer their questions. And what I have found is when young people like your daughter find out that the reason they're asking questions and the reason they're struggling is because God made them logic smart, that can really help them understand. So affirming her for being curious and for asking questions, and obviously she has heartache over the death of her grandfather, that is appropriate, and it will pass differently as a believer, but the grief is real. A lot of you young people today, they don't want to feel anything sad. They want to be happy all the time because technology has taught them they can be happy all the time. And you need to let her grieve and hold her when she cries, and let her know that you also are shedding tears over not just the loss of that life, but even the decisions that she's making. These are confusing times. I bet Kerby has something to say about that as well.
First of all, can I recommend another book, Screens and Teens?
Thank you.
Which is your book as well. And I would say that one of the things, Curtis, you can find on our website is a number of people that we've interviewed that sort of answer some of those questions. You know, whether it's Lee Strobel, whether it's William Lane Craig, whether it's J. Warner Wallace, whether it's Sean McDowell. There are a lot of people that have tried to answer some of those questions, not only about certainly why is there evil in the world, to the whole issue of their sexuality, and that's one of the resources that we provide here. And so the first question you might want to ask is whether or not your daughter would be willing to read a book, because I certainly could recommend some books off air. But even if they weren't, we could certainly point them to some very good YouTube videos, or even some of the videos that we're doing right now here with Kathy. So that's the case. But again, sometimes they're so inundated by the world with these screens. That's why, again, if I got commission for all the times I've recommended Screens and Teens, I probably have a fair amount of income, because I have recommended your book. Yeah. And so while we talk about 8 Great Smarts, let me just talk about Screens and Teens, because that's a big issue too, as you know.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Yeah, it's easy to be discouraged.
Well, let me just real quickly encourage you to go to the website, pointofview.net. And as you go there, you can first of all go to greatsmarts.com. You will find everything you need there. And again, if you get the book, you also get the assessment, but you can also go to celebratekids.com. And as you can tell, we've really enjoyed our time with you today, and just been enjoying following your career and all the things God has done through you.
Well, thank you. He has been faithful, and it's a joy to be back with you. It's a joy to watch all the work that you do here at Point of View and at Probe. Really significant content that you address with people. I'm so grateful. Good to be with you.
Well, again, I know you had a long drive over here, and so it means a lot that you came in studio for us today. So one last time, all of the material that we have been talking about today is on the website at pointofview.net. You can see the Viewpoints commentary, some of the Take Action material, some of the books, and other resources. So I would encourage you to go to pointofview.net and find out a little bit more. Of course, we've been talking about the book, 8 Great Smarts, Discover and Nurture Your Child's Intelligences, 8 Great Smarts for Homeschoolers, a guide to teaching based on your child's unique strengths. And these are such good resources. I encourage you to use these to figure out your children, your grandchildren, maybe even to figure you out as you are starting to make some sense out of all of that. So I want to thank everybody that's made a part of this program today. That's, of course, Andrew as our engineer, Steve as our producer, and we look forward to seeing you next time right here on Point of View.
Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas recently said, "The Declaration of Independence has weathered every storm for 245 years. It birthed a great nation. It abolished the sin of slavery, and it endeavored to address its effects. While we have failed the Declaration time and again, and the ideals of the Declaration time and again, I know of no time," said Thomas, "when the ideals have failed us." While some see our founding as fatally flawed and promote ideas that have failed every time they've been tried, at Point of View, like Justice Thomas, we still believe in America's ideals. And if you do too, make a difference today. Join the Truth Team as we promote the unchanging truth that gave us liberty and prosperity. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. The original Americans responded to the call. Will you? Pointofview.net/team and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.